I've been working the night shift at this rundown motel for a few months now. It's the kind of place you'd expect to see on some ghost hunting TV show, with its dimly lit corridors, outdated decor, and eerily quiet atmosphere. I never thought I'd end up here, but after my last job fell through, I was desperate. The motel sits just outside of a small, nearly forgotten town, nestled far enough from civilization that cell reception is barely a thing. And as if to add to the ominous vibe, tonight I'd be the only staff member on duty. It was a typical shift, starting at 10 p.m. The manager told me earlier that day to expect a large group check-in around 10:30 p.m. A bit unusual considering we almost never have full bookings. The motel is small and usually quiet, its rooms accessible only from the inside hallway. There are no outdoor entrances like the ones you see in cheap roadside motels. So when I learned that an entire group had booked every single room, it felt strange. I tried to shrug it off and focus on my usual tasks, straightening up the front desk, ensuring the register was in order, and preparing the key cards. But an unsettling feeling crept into my gut. Something about tonight felt off. By 10:30 p.m. I was on edge, waiting for the group to show up. I kept looking toward the entrance, expecting to see a crowd, but only one man walked in. He approached the front desk slowly, his steps almost silent against the old, faded carpet. The man looked odd. He wore an outdated suit, and his face was partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, though barely visible in the dim light, seemed to hold an unsettling gleam. He walked up to the counter and set a bundle of cash on the desk. "I'm here for the check-in," he said, his voice smooth but lacking warmth. "Right," I replied, eyeing the stack of cash. "You're with the group, correct?" I glanced around, hoping to see others entering behind him, but the entrance remained empty. "They'll arrive later," he answered, his lips curling into a grin. "No need to worry, I'll handle everything. Normally we require IDs for all guests checking in, but paying up front with cash? We usually turn a blind eye, especially when business is this slow. Okay, I'll get you checked in. Here's the key to room 105. I pushed the key card toward him, still feeling uneasy. "So when are the others arriving?" "They'll come in due time," he replied, turning to leave. "Oh, one more thing." He stopped mid-stride, glancing back at me, his grin widening. "I'll need to give you some instructions. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Before I could say anything, he disappeared down the hallway. I watched him go, his figure vanishing into the shadows cast by the dim hallway lights. An eerie silence filled the lobby. 10 minutes passed, and then 15. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking suddenly louder than usual. An eerie silence filled the lobby, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling around me. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of children giggling. My head snapped up, my eyes darting toward the entrance. I stood up from my chair, straining to see through the glass doors, but the dim light from the parking lot revealed nothing. I felt a prickle of fear rise on my skin. Maybe some of the guests had brought kids with them, I told myself. I was trying to rationalize it, but I knew something was off. Suddenly the man appeared in front of the desk, almost out of thin air. I jumped, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Did I scare you?" he asked, a smirk curling at the edges of his lips. His eyes gleamed under the shadow of his hat. I forced a laugh. "No, not really," I lied, trying to play it cool. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing through the dim light of the reception area. "Listen closely," he began, his voice low and deliberate. "This group I'm with, they're a bit different. There are certain rules you need to follow for the rest of the night." With that, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. "Read it," he said, his grin widening as he watched me take the paper. The look on his face sent a chill crawling down my spine. "Okay," I replied hesitantly, holding the paper between my fingers. "Pay attention," he added before turning and walking away. His head still turned towards me until he vanished into the hallway. I stared after him, my mouth dry, feeling like I'd just been dropped into some kind of twisted game. Shaking off the feeling, I set the paper down on the counter and added it to a pile of other documents. Thank you notes, customer requests, things I usually ignored until the end of my shift. I had other work to do, like finalizing the check-in, so I turned my attention back to my paperwork, hoping to lose myself in the monotony. Minutes passed and the eerie silence returned. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. I sighed, knowing the strange man was the only guest at the moment. Great, I thought, not looking forward to any more interactions. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer, but then they stopped abruptly, just at the edge of my line of sight. I waited, expecting the man to appear around the corner, but nothing happened. Seconds ticked by in eerie stillness. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a wave of anxiety washed over me. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I needed to make sure everything was okay. Slowly, I stepped away from the reception desk and crept toward the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the corner. I held my breath and peered around, half expecting to see the man standing there. But there was nothing. An empty hallway greeted me, silent and dimly lit. I felt a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. I had definitely heard footsteps. Shaking my head, I turned back toward the reception, telling myself I was just imagining things. But as I walked back, my eyes fell on the desk and my heart skipped a beat. The piece of paper the man had given me was now lying face up on top of the stack. I froze, staring at it. I knew I had placed it beneath a pile of other papers, yet here it was, almost as if it wanted me to see it. Taking a deep breath, I approached the desk. My hand trembled as I picked up the paper. Maybe it was time to read whatever was on it. I unfolded the paper with shaky hands, my pulse quickening with every second. It felt as though the paper itself radiated a faint chill, a subtle reminder of the man's unsettling presence. I swallowed hard and started to read the neatly typed list. Guests' rules for the night. Rule 1. If you see any of us standing in the hallway at night, do not acknowledge us. We are there for a reason, and it has nothing to do with you. Rule 2. If you encounter a crying child in the lobby or hallway, do not approach. Simply turn around and hum softly to yourself until you are out of sight. My eyes widened as I remembered the faint giggling I'd heard earlier. I glanced nervously toward the lobby, half expecting to see a child standing there, but it was empty. My grip on the paper tightened as I continued reading. Rule 3. If you hear multiple voices coming from a single guest room, do not be alarmed. Speak only when the voice you recognize asks you a direct question. Rule 4. Do not leave the front desk between 1:30 a.m. and 2 a.m., even if you hear screams for help or for any other reason. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I checked the clock. It was just past midnight. I paused, looking over the remaining rules on the paper. There were more, but I couldn't bring myself to continue. This whole situation was spiraling into madness, and I wanted no part of it. I set the paper aside, shaking my head. No way was I going to deal with whatever sick game this was. I just needed to get through the night. I leaned back in my chair, trying to calm down. I closed my eyes, taking a few slow, deep breaths. It was almost midnight. The group that the man mentioned still hadn't arrived. Maybe he was just pulling some kind of bizarre prank on me. I didn't know, and I didn't care. I just had to get through the night. As the minutes ticked by, the lobby grew eerily quiet. The silence pressed in on me, heavy and thick, as if the motel itself was holding its breath. I was staring at the clock when the sound of footsteps filled the hallway again. Slow, deliberate steps growing louder and louder until they stopped at the edge of my vision. "Oh no, not again," I muttered under my breath. My heart pounded, and a cold chill ran down my spine. I braced myself, waiting for what would happen next. From the hallway emerged a tall, thin man. His face was obscured, partially covered by a cloth or mask of some sort. His limbs were unnaturally elongated, his movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. I froze, my mind racing in that moment. The tall figure approached me with slow, deliberate steps, his head tilting slightly as if observing me. I felt every muscle in my body tense up. "Can I help you?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, his presence oppressive, as if he were sucking the air out of the room. A faint buzzing noise began to fill the air, emanating from the man. It grew louder, worming its way into my ears, vibrating through my skull. I glanced down at the desk in an attempt to break eye contact, and there it was, the list of rules. My eyes darted across the page until I found what I was looking for. Rule 5. If a guest stares at you for more than 5 seconds, close your eyes and count to 5. When you open them, they should be gone. The buzzing intensified, growing almost unbearable. I squeezed my eyes shut, my mind racing. I started counting. 1, 2, 3. My heart was slamming against my chest, every beat faster than the last. The buzzing noise pulsed around me, making my skin crawl. 4, 5. The buzzing had stopped. I opened my eyes. The lobby was empty. I felt the tension in my body release all at once, leaving me lightheaded and shaky. My breath came out in ragged gasps as I leaned out against the desk for support. I glanced at the clock. It was 1 a.m. I had 30 minutes until I had to abide by Rule 4, the one about not leaving the front desk. I grabbed the list again, my hands trembling as I read further. Rule 6. Should you hear scratching or scraping sounds coming from under any of our doors, ignore it. Rule 7. When a child guest brings you a drawing, accept it with a smile and look at it. Rule 8. When you hear whispering behind you while you stand at the desk, do not turn around. Rule 9. If you notice a guest's reflection in the lobby mirror staring back with a different expression, avert your eyes immediately. Oh God, I whispered. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. This wasn't some joke. This wasn't just a prank. Something was very, very wrong here, and I was stuck in the middle of it. I heard a soft rustling sound to my left. I turned my head slowly, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing just at the edge of my vision was a small child, their face hidden under the hood of a dark sweatshirt. I couldn't make out any features, just a shadowy outline. The child stepped forward, extending a pale hand toward me. In it, they held a piece of paper. My blood ran cold as Rule 7 flashed through my mind. I forced myself to smile, though every nerve in my body screamed to run. "Thank you," I managed to say, reaching out to take the drawing. I looked down at the paper in my hand. It was a crude drawing of a man with no face, just smooth skin, no eyes, no mouth, no nose. A shiver ran down my spine. Suddenly the child snapped their head up, the hood falling back. My breath caught in my throat. The face was just like the drawing, smooth, featureless skin where eyes, a mouth, a nose should be. I stumbled backward, tripping over my chair and falling onto the floor. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out every rational thought. When I managed to look up again, the child was gone. I sat there for a moment, frozen, my mind reeling. This was too much. I had to get out of here. I didn't care about the job, the rules, any of it. I just had to leave. I scrambled to my feet and was about to rush toward the exit when I stopped dead in my tracks. The man, the one who had checked in earlier, was standing in the middle of the lobby, his grin wider than ever. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice dripping with amusement. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I just stood there, my body trembling. The man tilted his head, eyeing me with a look of eerie satisfaction. "See, I forgot to tell you the most important rule," he said, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Under no circumstances should you leave the motel before sunrise. You may find yourself unable to return." A chill ran through me. "Return from where?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He grinned wider, his eyes glinting with a strange light. "That's for you to discover," he replied cryptically before turning away. He walked slowly toward the hallway, his gaze lingering on me until he disappeared around the corner. I was left standing in the lobby, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I glanced at the clock. It was 1:25 a.m. I didn't know what to do. Should I stay? Should I leave and risk whatever was out there? My heart was telling me to run, but my instincts screamed at me to heed the rules. As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, it began. Screams coming from the hallway, harsh guttural screams that echoed through the motel, bouncing off the walls and pounding into my skull. I glanced at the clock, 1:32 a.m. Rule 4 echoed in my head. Do not leave the front desk between 1:30 a.m. and 2 a.m., even if you hear screams for help or for any other reason. I clutched the counter, every muscle in my body tense. The screams grew louder, more desperate. I jolted in my chair, my heart leaping into my throat. It was a raw, guttural cry that filled the air, clawing its way into my ears. I glanced at the clock, 1:37 a.m. My pulse quickened, every second stretching into an eternity. The screams didn't stop. They echoed down the hallways, seeming to come from every direction, getting louder and more desperate with each passing moment. "Stay put," I muttered to myself, gripping the edge of the desk. My knuckles turned white as I braced against the instinct to run. I had to remind myself that this place was not normal. that these rules weren't written as a joke. The screams rose to a fever pitch, shifting from human cries to something more monstrous, more guttural. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the noise. It was like 1,000 nails scraping against my sanity, a cacophony that clawed at the edges of my mind. The clock ticked loudly in the silence between each scream. I peeked at it again, 1:45 a.m., 15 minutes left, just 15 more minutes. My stomach twisted. Could I make it through this? The screams transformed, morphing into sobs and wails that reverberated through the empty hallways. They grew more pitiful, pleading like someone trapped in endless torment. My nails dug into my palms as I forced myself to remain still, to ignore the cries for help. Do not leave the front desk. The words echoed in my head, steadying me as I resisted the overwhelming urge to bolt. The clock ticked on, slowly, agonizingly, 1:50 a.m. The cries in the hallway seemed to inch closer, pressing against the walls, as if they would burst through and flood the room. I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood, focusing on the pain to ground myself. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thickening with every second. The screams warped again, blending into a chaotic symphony of agony. I gritted my teeth, feeling sweat drip down my temples. 1:58 a.m. 2 more minutes. The screams continued, but they began to fade, becoming a haunting background noise. It was as if the building itself had started to absorb the sound, muting it, trapping it within the walls. The clock's second hand crawled forward, each tick like a nail being driven into my skull. I stared at it, willing it to move faster. 1:59 a.m. Almost there. Almost. Finally, the clock struck 2 a.m. The screams stopped. Silence washed over the lobby, a cold, suffocating quiet that made my ears ring. I sagged back into my chair, gasping for air, my heart pounding like a drum. It was over, at least for now. Silence filled the lobby, pressing down on me with a weight that made it difficult to breathe. My pulse gradually slowed, but the dread remained like a stubborn stain on my consciousness. I glanced at the clock, 2:02 a.m. The rules still loomed in my mind like dark omens. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. My hands were clammy, leaving faint prints on the reception desk. I wanted nothing more than to run, to get as far away from this motel as possible, but that man's words haunted me. Under no circumstances should you leave the motel before sunrise. You may find yourself unable to return. Return from where? I didn't dare find out. So I stayed put, waiting, straining to hear the faintest sound. The only noise was the hum of the fluorescent lights above, flickering like they were struggling to stay awake. I eyed the dimly lit hallway leading to the guest rooms, half expecting something to materialize from the shadows. Seconds stretched into minutes. The stillness was worse than the screams. At least the noise gave me something to react to, a crisis to focus on. This emptiness, though, it gnawed at me, feeding my fear. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. My breath caught in my throat as I turned my head ever so slightly to my left. A small figure stood just on the edge of my vision, near the entrance to the hallway. My stomach dropped. A child. I forced myself to stay calm, my mind racing back to the rules. Rule 2. If you encounter a crying child in the lobby or hallway, do not approach. Simply turn around and hum softly to yourself until you are out of sight. The child didn't seem to be crying, at least not yet. Its small frame eerily still. For a moment, I thought it might be one of the guest children playing some sick joke, but deep down, I knew this was something else, something not human. The child's head tilted slightly as if it was trying to see me better, trying to gauge my reaction. I felt a shiver run through me. I needed to follow the rule, and I needed to do it now. I slowly turned away, keeping my eyes fixed on the front desk. My heart was thudding loudly in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. Then a sound broke the silence, a soft, pitiful whimper. The child had begun to cry. I forced myself to hum, keeping it soft and steady like a lullaby. The sound felt unnatural, leaving my lips, awkward, almost mechanical, but I didn't stop. I hummed a song I barely remembered from my childhood, something my mother used to sing when I had nightmares. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the front desk, refusing to acknowledge the presence behind me. The crying grew louder, more insistent, like it was trying to claw its way into my head. I hummed louder, my voice trembling. Every fiber of my being wanted to turn around to see what was standing just a few feet away, but I didn't. Don't look back, I told myself. Don't even think about it. Gradually, the cries softened, dwindling to faint sobs, and then finally, silence. I swallowed hard, daring to let out a slow, shaky breath. I continued to hum as I moved towards the far side of the reception desk, placing the solid wood between me and whatever had just been there. I risked a glance to the side. The hallway was empty. I slumped into the chair behind the desk, my whole body trembling. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to regain some sense of composure. It was over. I had followed the rule, but the relief was fleeting. This was only a small victory in what felt like an unending nightmare. 7 a.m. The seconds ticked away, each one like the drip of a leaky faucet, reminding me that time was still moving, even though it felt like the night would never end. A creak sounded to my right. I snapped my head towards the lobby mirror. It was an old, ornate piece with a wooden frame. I glanced at my reflection, my own pale, tired face staring back at me, eyes wide with fear. I almost looked like a ghost myself. But then, something caught my eye. Behind me, near the hallway entrance, a figure stood. My heart nearly stopped. It was the child again, but this time its face was visible in the reflection. My stomach twisted. Its eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to go on forever, its mouth twisted into a grin that stretched far too wide. Rule 9. If you notice a guest's reflection in the lobby mirror staring back with a different expression, avert your eyes immediately. I yanked my gaze away, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to erase the image burned into my mind. The grotesque, hollow-eyed stare, that horrible smile. It felt like it was seeping into my thoughts, tainting every corner of my brain. I stayed like that for a few moments, eyes closed, breathing deeply, willing the fear to subside. The room felt colder, as if whatever was behind me had sucked all the warmth out of the air. My mind buzzed with the pressure of it, an unbearable itch that begged me to look back, to check if it was still there. Don't look, just breathe, let it go. Minutes passed, or perhaps only seconds. It was impossible to tell. Slowly, I opened my eyes, staring down at the reception desk. I didn't dare look at the mirror again. I waited, straining my ears for any sound that might betray its presence. But there was nothing, only the faint hum of the lights and my own ragged breathing. Gradually, I allowed myself to glance towards the hallway. It was empty. I turned back to face the lobby, keeping my eyes away from the mirror. I was safe, for now. My heartbeat gradually slowed, returning to something close to normal. I sat there, staring blankly at the reception desk, trying to make sense of what had just happened. This was no ordinary night. It was like I had been thrust into a world where the rules of reality no longer applied. For a moment, I found comfort in the ordinary act of breathing, in the faint hum of the reception lights overhead. But the feeling of dread lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room. Slowly, I started to regain some control over my thoughts. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, focusing on grounding myself in this moment. What am I even doing here? My mind whispered. I should just leave. Get out of here while I still can. But then the man's words replayed in my head. You may find yourself unable to return. Was it a threat, or just another trick to keep me here? I glanced toward the glass doors that led to the parking lot. The exit was right there. My car was waiting just a short sprint away. I could grab my keys, dash outside, and be gone in less than a minute. But what then? What did he mean by unable to return? My fingers drummed nervously against the edge of the reception desk. I could leave. But what if I was wrong? I looked at the clock again. 3 a.m. I decided to wait, to give it more time. After all, I'd made it this far. If sunrise was my safety net, I wasn't about to jeopardize it with just a few hours left to go. I kept glancing at the clock, willing time to pass faster. The seconds dragged like molasses, each tick echoing in my mind, mocking my sense of urgency. My 3:30 a.m. My nerves were on edge, but I had begun to find a rhythm in the silence. Maybe I could endure this. Maybe the worst had passed. 4 a.m. The hum of the lights, the rustle of papers on the desk, and even my own shaky breathing became a mantra, a reminder that I was still here, still holding on. 4:30 a.m. I stood up and paced behind the desk, rubbing my arms to keep warm, The air felt colder, the shadows in the hallway longer, but I focused on the upcoming dawn. Just hang in there. Finally, it was 5 a.m., an hour left. I exhaled a sigh of cautious relief. But then, I felt it. A change in the air, an unspoken tension settling into the room like a fog. I turned my head towards the hallway, feeling my stomach clench with dread. The shadows shifted slightly, and then they emerged. The hallway was filled with figures, standing silently in the dim light. Men, women, children. They crowded together, facing my direction, but remaining eerily still. My heart thudded in my chest as I remembered Rule 1. If you see any of us standing in the hallway at night, do not acknowledge us. We are there for a reason, and it has nothing to do with you. I forced my eyes away, staring straight ahead at the reception desk, refusing to focus on them. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles turning white. I could feel their presence, a suffocating weight pressing against me as if urging me to break the rule, to look at them, to acknowledge their existence. Seconds felt like hours as I listened to the faint rustle of their clothing, the almost imperceptible sound of their breathing. My mind screamed at me to run, to look, to do something. But I stayed still, staring forward, clinging to the hope that ignoring them would keep me safe. One of them stepped forward. I sensed it more than I saw it. My peripheral vision caught the slight movement, the shift of a shadow in the corner of my eye. My chest tightened as my lungs refused to fill completely. I squeezed my eyes shut. My heart hammered in my ears, every muscle in my body tensed. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, faint, like leaves rustling in the wind. It was right behind me. "Look at us," it hissed. "Look at what you've ignored." I bit my lip, the pain grounding me. Do not acknowledge them. The rule was clear, but the urge was there, clawing at the back of my mind, gnawing away at my self-control. The whispering continued, swirling around me like a cold breeze, a chorus of voices blending into a haunting murmur. I fought against it, focusing on the ticking of the clock. I needed to stay calm, just one more hour. The murmurs faded, and I dared to crack my eyes open slightly, peering straight ahead. The hallway was empty again. I released the breath I'd been holding, a wave of relief washing over me. I had made it through. I checked the clock, 5:50 a.m. 10 more minutes. I exhaled slowly, refusing to let my guard down completely. My eyes flickered towards the lobby mirror, catching my own reflection. I looked exhausted, eyes red, hair disheveled, but there was a spark of hope in my gaze, almost there. Suddenly, the clock struck 6 a.m. A soft light began to seep through the glass doors, heralding the arrival of dawn. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the suffocating pressure that had filled the room dissipating with the darkness. I stood up on shaky legs and took a deep, shaky breath. It was over. I had made it. I walked towards the glass doors, pushing them open to let in the cool morning air. It was like stepping into a different world. The motel parking lot was bathed in the warm glow of the rising sun. The birds were chirping, the early morning mist lifting from the ground. I turned back one last time, glancing at the now empty lobby. It looked normal, mundane, as if the horrors of the night had never happened. I grabbed my jacket from behind the counter and stepped outside, letting the door swing shut behind me. I walked to my car, feeling the sun on my face, the warmth sinking into my skin, dispelling the chill of the night. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and glanced back at the motel one last time. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in one of the windows, a shadowy silhouette watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. Shaking my head, I pulled out of the parking lot and drove away. As the motel faded in the rearview mirror, I let out a shaky laugh. I had made it through the night, but one thing was clear: I was never coming back. If these stories creeped you out, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe for more spine-tingling content. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are hiding in plain sight. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.